Good evening, everyone. Bienvenidos, bienvenidas, y bienvenides. Before starting with our event remarks, I would first like to thank the Roosevelt House Institute of Public Policy and its director, Basil A. Mikkel, for hosting our event tonight. We could not have asked for a better venue to host this event. I would also like to show our appreciation and gratitude to all the friends of Centro out there who made our Giving Tuesday a success. Thanks for your support. We were able to continue with our mission of researching, preserving, and sharing the Puerto Rican experience. Tonight, I have the honor to introduce a very special guest for our last event of the year, Bianca Graulau. Bianca graduated from Syracuse University with a double major in broadcast journalism and political science. She's one of the newest independent journalists and young voices that is raising awareness about the issues Puerto Ricans face on the island, particularly at a time when government agencies and media outlets are failing to communicate the real needs of our communities. In conversation with Bianca, we have the honor to have Dr. Yarimar Bonilla, leading academic and directora of Centro. Please help me welcome them on stage.
Thank you, Angel, and thank you so much, Bianca, for joining us.
Of course.
I know everyone, when they leave here, they're gonna wanna be independent journalists when they grow up, but I have to say it's really fun being directora too, because then you wanna meet someone and you're like, come have cafecito with me at Centro. So thank you, I'm so excited to meet you and be in dialogue with you. So for today, I prepared some questions. Really, I wanted to get to know you better, get to know your process, your history, your personal history, what brought you to the work that you do and how you approach that work. So to start, can you tell us a little bit more about like how you set down the path of journalism? What led you to that career?
Well, thank you for having me and thank you all for being here. I've know about your work for a long time. It's the first time I'm meeting you, so it's a pleasure for me. So, okay, how did I get started? I always say that I don't think my story is particularly inspirational in the sense that it's not like, oh, I always wanted to be a journalist. It was more like I was bad at math and science and I enjoyed history and, I was class president for a little bit and I was like, what could I do? Okay, maybe journalism. So I did some programs around senior year where I started sort of understanding what journalism was about. And I got accepted into Syracuse University, which had a really good journalism program. Once I got started there, I started loving it. They teach you everything from the basics, just writing at first, then radio, then TV. And I started falling in love with the craft of telling a story through video. I was part of the, student-run TV news station, and I did the news in Spanish there too, and collaborated in the English ones. So by the time I was ready to graduate from Syracuse, I couldn't wait to be a local reporter. I was excited to get out there, interview people, put these stories together, and that's sort of how it started. However, I do remember, so I did my whole education in English, but I come from Puerto Rico, mi primer idioma es español. That was a challenge and a struggle, especially having to be on TV, speaking English, doing these stories. When I get nervous, my accent really comes out. And I would have to do these classes where I had to pretend to be live in front of, my classmates, and I would freak out and my accent would come out, and I would have professors who were just like, yeah, I can't understand what you're saying. So I left the university convinced that I had to do Spanish news because I wasn't ready to do news in English. So I started doing Spanish news, but I appreciate that experience because I love reporting in Spanish too. So I started working with Univision. I started in Palm Springs, California, a tiny little market. There were like a total of 5 of us for the whole station. And I had that practice of going out every day on the field by myself with a camera, interviewing people, putting a story together, and then putting it on TV every single day. I did that. I went to Sacramento for a while. I did it in Spanish too. So I did about reporting 2 years in Spanish before I transitioned to English. And then I continued reporting in English, but also facing that sort of frustration that I had to be fighting for our stories to be told. I had to convince my bosses why it wasn't like a favor to our communities, that it was our responsibility to cover these stories. And I also faced the challenge that they wanted to talk to my generation, but wouldn't listen to us about how to appeal to our generation, how to bring the news to our generation in a way that they wanted to watch. So I got tired of fighting them every day. And I was just like, I'm just gonna try to do it on my own. And that's why I'm doing this.
So when you decided to do it on your own, what did that look like?
So it looked like my most recent job was with NBC. And that was a different kind of job in the sense that it was an experiment from the network, from NBC News. They wanted to try to create a network for a younger generation. But once again, I felt like we were missing the mark in terms of how to do it. I'm very grateful for the experience because I did get to do different kind of storytelling. I did get to explore many ways of telling stories, but I still faced those same frustrations. So I would pitch a story, particularly about Puerto Rico, y me pichaban. They would ignore my pitch, and then I would just go on my own. I would take my weekend. I was off work, so I could do whatever I wanted. And I would just fly to Puerto Rico with my camera, cover the story, and put it on YouTube. If it got maybe 200 views, maybe no one would have said anything. But once it started getting hundreds of thousands of views, they were like, what are you doing? You work for us. And I was like, I know, I pitched the story, you didn't want it. So I put it on social media. They were like, you can't do that. So I started getting in trouble and I was like, okay. And then I did it again and again. And I got written up. And then I said, listen, to me, it's more important to tell these stories than it is to follow the rules. That I know that makes me a very bad employee, but that's where my heart is. So at that point, I said, let me go out of my contract because this is what I want to be doing. So yes, it was scary to sort of let go of that monthly paycheck. But at the same time, I just knew that I needed to do it because I was complaining every day. I was just like, I can't keep doing this much longer. So I finished that job and I just continued what I had started doing while I was with them, which is continue to do stories to put them on YouTube. And at the time, TikTok was taking off. So I was also doing shorter videos for TikTok. And, you know, some of them would go viral because of the nature of TikTok. And I was like, you know what, I can do this. Like, done it before. I've done videos directly for social media. I can reach an audience. I don't know where the money's going to come from, but I'm just going to keep pushing until I figure it out.
I have to say, I knew a little bit about this story, not all of it. I didn't know you'd gotten written up. And I have to say, as part of what I really admire about you, and I've spoken about you in different contexts of how, to me, you're an example of how the new generation is, you know, questioning the rules, breaking them, but also questioning them, which is in some ways more important, right? Then tell me, how does this transition to independent journalism relate to then also a move back to Puerto Rico?
Yeah, so breaking the rules, that has been a theme because it has been a process of just following my curiosity, regardless of, you know, what people in the industry might think is the right way to cover things. I just think that there's this sense in mainstream news that I found myself fighting against every time because there's this idea that if you're too close to the story, that makes you biased, or that if you are a Puerto Rican who your heart is in these Puerto Rican stories, that then you can cover them fairly. And I think that's BS. I think that it puts me in a particular position where I can bring something to the table that maybe you won't get somewhere else. So of course, I have questioned myself many times, and I continue to question myself because I think it's important in order to keep me honest as a reporter. But I also know that I've seen the result of being able to follow that curiosity and also be honest with the way that I am reporting these things and communicating it to my audience, in the sense that I don't tell you I'm here to give you quote unquote objective news, because I don't think that's a thing. I think as journalists, we bring who we are to our stories. At the end of the day, from the moment we pick the story that we're going to cover to the moment that we pick the questions we're going to ask and who we're going to talk to and how we're going to put it together, our personal life experiences are affecting every decision along the way. So I rather be honest with my audience and say, this is what I'm bringing to you. I also rely on you to keep me honest. Did I miss something? Was I not fair with the particular topic? Did I show you all the sides fairly? But at the end of the day, I think I can provide that perspective that brings value to my reporting rather than take away from it.
Now, the way you talk about it makes me wonder how much of that is possible because of social media, right? Because when you're on TV, I guess people can write a letter to the press room or something, but like your fans, they slide into your DMs, right? They tell you what they think right there, you know, and you can remove that kind of fourth wall or whatever it is of pretending that you're biased and not, you know, I mean, pretending that you're unbiased. And being transparent about your connection to the story, partly because then they can also react to that, right? And be in dialogue with you about their relationship to the story as well. To what extent does that dialogue influence your work as well?
It absolutely does. You know, I have been able to notice a mistake or a lack of a certain important perspective in a story because of the comments. Mind you, there are a lot of trolls, people who are just there to, you know, try to annoy me. And they used to succeed. Now I just kind of like, whatever, it's just part of it. So yes, that relationship and conversation with the audience is very important, because not only do they give me tips of stories in order to cover something I didn't know was happening, but they give me a different perspective. And you know, the way it works on TikTok, I don't know how many people here are on TikTok, but there's a lot of that back and forth conversation. A creator will do a video, someone will stitch it, which is, you know, they'll use a little clip of it and then respond and sort of like add a perspective or, you know, take down what they said or whatever it is. And sometimes, you know, it's just people trying to one up each other. It's the equivalent of quote tweeting someone on Twitter. And sometimes it could be a healthy conversation, sometimes it's not. But I think when it is a healthy conversation, it leads to people learning something that they otherwise wouldn't have. So that aspect of it being on social media has been very valuable in that sense.
How many people in the audience are on TikTok? See, so is it the majority, half? I think it's about half, right? So tell me about the logics of social media and what it means to be an influencer. Do you consider yourself an influencer, or do you see what you're doing as different from that?
I don't know. It's a funny word, influencer. I don't know that I'm influencing anyone into anything, but I see myself as a content creator and I see myself as a journalist. I just think that the way social media works, when people feel like you're bringing value to them, they want more of it. They want to consume more of it, and you know, they follow you, and that's how you create a platform. So I don't know that the label is that important to me, but at the end of the day, just being able to see how my stories resonate, how they get shared, how people get something out of it, and they want more, well, that's what keeps me doing it. So I do love it.
And is there anything that is, you know, challenging about that, about having to have things that are clickbaity or click worthy, maybe is better, or that can go viral? Does that push a certain kind of sensationalism? Or like one thing I think about also is like the thumbnails on YouTube. They tend to be very dramatic, and even some of the posters or like the artwork for your videos, it's like, you know, it's very it's different from TV news, you know. So what do you think of that? Do you think that just makes sense for this generation?
I think there's some aspects of it I don't love, and there are things that had to be either too simplified, or you have to use certain tools because of the nature of social media that are just a way to grab people's attention because of the way social media works, because there's a short attention span, because they need visual cues as to why they want to watch this video and buy in. So I wish I didn't have to plaster my face all over my content. Like, I really wish I did it, but I know that the reason I have to do that is because is the way that people recognize what they're seeing and keeps them from scrolling right away. So in the absence of a recognized sort of logo, if you are watching Instagram or TikTok and you see NBC News or CNN, that gives you a visual cue. If you like NBC News and CNN, then you're like, okay, well, this is something I'm going to stop to see because I trust this platform. I trust where the information is coming from. In the absence of that, it's my face. So then when I'm doing these videos, there's so many of them that I wish I could just like show you the story right away. But I also know, because I've seen the algorithm and how it works, that if you see my face and you've seen my content before and you liked what you saw, you're more likely to stop and listen to what I have to say now. And it's one of those things, as much as I would love to say like, now I'm totally yo hago lo que me da la gana and, I just like follow my own rules, we're at the mercy of the algorithm. And same thing with the YouTube thumbnails. There's so many better images than my face to put on thumbnails, but I know that if you are on your feed on YouTube, we're scrolling so quickly nowadays that what's going to make you stop if you don't recognize where the content is coming from. So I do hope that eventually I can stray away from that and I could do a type of content that, it's like deeper, and in the sense that I don't have to, again, be putting my face all over it all the time. That's just one of the things that, because of the way social media works, is a tool that I have to use.
Because you're the brand, right?
Yeah.
I think that is the influencer thing, where when you're on social media, it's like you're marketing yourself, your persona, which has the good aspects to it because it means your voice, your perspective, that's the brand, right? But it's also your face,
Yeah.
So what about being a woman, a young woman, an attractive young woman navigating that logic as well? How do you deal with that?
Well, and one of the things that they always teach you in journalism school, and it's sort of like a thing in the industry, is sort of like, you're not the story. And I was very much from that school of thought, and even, even in the most recent documentary, Aquí Vive Gente, that was a conversation. How much of it do we want it to be like immediately like my face? I like, it's Bianca Graulau's story, or what's more important to me, that you hear from the people directly affected by these issues. So I have always liked to let those voices lead, because that is the most important thing for me. Now I had to balance a little bit of the two. So when it comes to me being the brand, and especially discovering that I'm more of an introvert in this stage of my life is, it's a thing I had to balance, because especially in Puerto Rico is so small, it's been kind of nice to be in New York City, where I'm a little no one. Because it is kind of crazy. I don't consider myself a famous person or anything like that. However, in Puerto Rico, everyone knows each other as it is. And then all of a sudden, voy al colmado, tú eres la que hace los TikTok. Oh my God, I'm just here, to buy almond milk. And all of a sudden I'm taking a selfie, So it is just the nature of social media and how it works, that all of a sudden all the attention is on you. So again, it's not necessarily my favorite thing. However, I am very grateful for that response, because at the end of the day, it goes hand in hand with the fact that the stories are reaching people. So the fact that people can recognize me means that they've been watching the stories. That's all I've ever wanted, since I started this reporting career. That's all any journalist wants, for these stories to reach people, because we believe they're important and people should know about them. So it's just part of it.
And what about the use of your choice of language use? Most of your videos are in English. Is that because of the algorithm, or why do them in English? And you've started doing these videos in English after moving to Puerto Rico. Yeah. So what were the choices there?
So it's a combination of things. The simpler answer is that I was already reporting in English, and I have a much smaller audience on social media, but it was an easier transition to continue to do the videos in English. And this is like one of the reasons, which is kind of like the weirder one, which is the fact that, yes, I started my reporting career in Spanish, Pero cuando yo trabajaba para Univisión, hice cosas para Telemundo, nos dicen mucho que tenemos que cambiar el acento. El acento puertorriqueño no es profesional. Entonces I had to speak like pronouncing all my S's and my R's. And that was just not natural to me, you know? So if you watch those videos, you're like, why are you talking like that? So, so it was not natural to me. So once I transitioned into reporting in English, I only know how to speak English one way. So that it just became, it's so weird because English is my second language, but it became more natural for me to report in English than it was in Spanish. So that's like a side reason. However, what I, believed was sort of my major reason was the fact that I was talking about, colonialism. If I'm talking about colonialism on my stories, I don't want the stories to stay in Puerto Rico. I wanted them to also reach the audience in the US, especially the people who can vote and hold their government accountable. So I wanted the stories to reach beyond Puerto Rico. And that was part of the reason for doing them in English. And eventually what I started finding out was that it was reaching the diaspora. And that was important to me to be able to have that audience too, so that they felt like, they were getting that perspective about Puerto Rico, and to speak to that audience that mostly what they have available to them is, corporate news coverage, which is very different than what I'm trying to do now. So then
How
that's
is it different?
It's different in the sense that, to give you an example, the hurricane would happen and it was very much like, pobrecitos, Puertorriqueños, they just can't catch a break. And they're US citizens, so we need to help them. And that to me is such a different message from, no, this is a matter of justice. Puerto Rico is a colony of the US. The US has a responsibility with the colony it has held for over a century. And Puerto Ricanos are not these like pobrecitos that are waiting with their hands out, for the US government to come rescue them. People are doing what they need to do. What we need to hold accountable is the key players, the people in government, the obstacles that they're putting for the people who are very much capable, but the resources have been put elsewhere. So to me, it was important to bring that message and that reporting to a wider audience. So doing it in English allowed me to do that. And I found that on TikTok, for example, you had people who have no connection to Puerto Rico, other than the fact that they were scrolling on their FYP, and I came across talking about Puerto Rico, and they were like, wow, I had no idea, and not even just from the US, from other countries. So the fact that I was able to reach that audience in English, I wanted to continue to do that. But to be honest with you, my dream would be to do everything in Spanish and English, because there is a part of me that was like, well, I am leaving out the local audience, especially when I'm covering issues that are a little bit more local and where, the change could happen locally. I didn't want to leave out the local audience that only speaks Spanish, but given the resources I had at the time, I had to pick. So I was doing it in English, but the last two videos have been in Spanish. And if I have the resources and I could do both, if I do the video in Spanish, have the subtitles in English and vice versa, I would love to continue to do that.
Yes. I lost track of my, okay. Sorry, I got caught up in the Cafecito. So I wanted to ask you about, well, first of all, there's always a relationship between journalism and advocacy, right? And a lot of journalists see the work that they're doing as a kind of advocacy, if nothing else, like giving platforms and, and voice to communities that are sometimes underrepresented or stories that are misunderstood. How do you see your work? Do you consider yourself an activist, an advocate, or just a journalist? Or and I don't mean just in a as a pejorative, I know a lot of journalists that have draw very strong lines, and that are I actually know a lot of journalists that are very invested in neutrality and unbiased and not having a kind of not letting their politics influence their work, etc. How do you navigate that as given your interest in breaking the rules?
Yeah, my interest is definitely in breaking the rules. However, my sort of guiding principle is to always be fair. So I am very aware of how me being a Puerto Rican woman of my age, of my generation, is going to affect the tone and shape of my story. But my interest is always in being fair. And that's why for me, it's important that for me, I'm putting the microphone before the activist. I don't consider myself the activist. I consider myself the communicator, because to me it's important to keep that separation. And I will forever say that I am in admiration of these communities and the amazing work they do. And it's very close to my heart, but I will always be the communicator. There's a separation between what they do and what I do, because I have to scrutinize. As much as I love these communities and I admire the work they do, and I will continue to cover and uplift them, it is important for me to also scrutinize the information coming from these communities and activists, because at the end of the day, that's my responsibility with the audience. So my main job is to keep those in power accountable, but I also have to have a clear head when it comes to, I can't take things as fact without fact checking them, without double checking that the information I'm giving the audience and the public and the people consuming my content, that I've made sure that I am telling you the right information. So no, I don't consider myself an activist, but I mean, at the end of the day, what I'm advocating for is a better quality of life. Right now, I'm reporting in Puerto Rico, and that's what's important to me. So I think, I always have to check myself in the sense that, I can't pretend to solve all these issues like one video at a time. My job is just to communicate and give people information and uncover things that they didn't know about before, and bring this information to a wider public. But at the end of the day, that's my job, and to give the platform to the people who are there, who are on the field making the change happen.
So you don't consider yourself an activist, but your work has had a lot of impact. I think what I noticed most was when you did the story about Act 2022 and gentrification in Puerto Rico, that those topics were really being underestimated, undercovered, covered up, I don't know, in mainstream media. And after you did a video, for those who haven't seen it, she has this amazing video, which also I want to know how you got this amazing interview with someone US born, moved to Puerto Rico, bought a beachfront apartment in a non-touristy area of San Juan, and proceeded to kick out all the residents, right? And he speaks to you so frankly, so shockingly, in a way that I think it had a lot of impact in Puerto Rico, because no one had seen someone from an Act 2022 perspective talk about their entitlement in that way. And so your news story made national news, and you were interviewed on many news platforms, and I think you really brought a lot of attention to those issues. How did you feel about the impact that story had?
I mean, again, because at the end of the day, what I want is for my stories to reach people. It was great to see how, after I covered that story, sort of the traditional media outlets in Puerto Rico followed. So then it sort of stirred up this conversation that it's not that people hadn't covered it before, but it wasn't covered like that, and it wasn't part of the conversation at the time. So then it made people sort of follow suit in terms of like, oh, this is an important topic, we should be talking about this, specifically because I did break the story of that building particularly. And that's an example of something that came as a tip from someone who followed me on Instagram. So that's how I learned about that situation. And then I tied it into the bigger picture. In fact, some of the interviews I had from before, I learned about this building. And then I started with the story of the building, and then I tied it into the bigger picture. So the way I feel is that I love that it sort of led to that, because, you start this project with, on your own, without a platform or a following, and you're just hoping that people will take notice and that it'll reach people. So to see that people were taking it seriously and recognizing it as not only work that they liked, but also as important conversations that we should be having, I think that story was a big turning point.
And I want to know how you see yourself in the media landscape in Puerto Rico. And as you know, after Ricky renuncia, there were things that came out in the chat that increased concerns that people already had about, you know, the kind of news that they were getting, the stories that were being covered, the interest behind media platforms in Puerto Rico. So where do you think the kind of work that you do fits into the landscape of El Nuevo Día, El CPI, Jay Fonseca, David Begno? How do you imagine yourself in that landscape?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think it's interesting to see how each of these platforms and personalities sort of, you know, have their own style and their way of communicating. I see mine as separate in the sense of like, I guess I'm the one who has more flexibility in terms of how I want to present these stories, right? Because at the end of the day, you know, Jay Fonseca works with a channel, so does David Begno, and you know, El CPI has its own rules, and everyone has sort of their own area of how they want to tackle these stories. So it's hard to say how I see myself. It's just for me, I'm going like one story at a time. You know what I mean? For me, what really keeps me going and keeps me enjoying what I do is sort of getting into these stories like head first and doing what I love doing, which is doing the interviews, writing the story, editing it, putting it together. So I don't know. I guess it would be hard to say. It would be a question for people who watch. Everyone sees me in a little bit of a different way. All I know is that I'm loving it.
I have a couple more questions, and then I'm going to open up to Q&A. I also count on Angel to help me with timekeeping. So when we announced that we were interviewing you, that we were welcoming you for a cafecito, some people said, you better not ask her all about Bad Bunny. You better make sure you talk about all the other important work she's done. Have I done that? Can I ask her about I can't? Okay.
Permission.
So how did that come about?
You know, I told the story, but I'll tell it again. So basically, the album had just come out. It was like the day after. And I got a call. I was at the airport actually, and I got this call and I didn't recognize the number, so I didn't pick up. And then I get a text, hey, I'm a producer for Bad Bunny, please call me. And I was like, I'm not a producer for Bad Bunny, why would they be calling me? So then I was like, well, let me see. So then I call back and then he's like, Benito loves your work. He had this idea that, have you listened to the album? I was like, not yet, honestly. And then he's like, I know. He's like, listen to this one song. It's called El Apagón, and you'll understand why we're reaching out to you. We would love for you to do a story, and that story would become part of the music video. And I couldn't really envision that, but I was like, well, and I'm playing it cool. But I'm like, well, I want you to know I'm a journalist. Like, that's what I do. Yeah, that's exactly what we want you to do. And I was like, well, I had to be able to keep my journalistic independence, editorial independence when I'm doing this. Great, we just want to help you make it look better, take it to the next level. We'll pair you up with a director and it'll look amazing, but the content will be up to you. And I was like, it sounds too good to be true, but thank you, let's talk. I hang up. And then I text my brothers and I'm like, you think that's someone trolling me? You think So then I did my reporter work and I checked and I, asked someone else if that was really a Bad Bunny producer. They said yes. And I was like, interesting. Okay. So then, a couple months went by between like talking here and there and making it happen. So then we had the actual first meeting where it's like, yes, we're going to actually do this. And then it was like, oh yeah, we want it for next month. And I was like, what? So we all started scrambling to try to get that story together in record time, because at the beginning we're like having all these dreams, all these things we want to do. We want to do a whole investigation and interview so-and-so. And then it's like, well, we only have a month. So now we really have to like get going and put this story together. So yeah. And then it was like every day, just go. There was not a weekend. It was just like days working like one after the other. But I always say that I just felt so energized because it's the kind of thing I love to do. And for the first time I had a team that I was doing it with. So it was a dream scenario in that sense, that no one was telling me what to do or what to say and how to say it. It was more like, how can we support this vision, really take it to the next level? And then, always knowing and sort of nervous, like, oh, when this like gets out, like it's going to be in a major platform, what's going to happen? But it was really exciting and it was a really good experience.
I loved it. I mean, I'm a Benito fan. Everyone here knows that. My nickname is Bad Bonilla. I think yo hago lo que me da la gana en Centro también. And I love that I watched it on YouTube, and I was like fascinated by the comments too, like all the comments that people were putting from all over the world. Because yeah, I'm thinking a lot about Bad Bunny, I write about him, etc. And I'm fascinated by how he manages to tell very specific Puerto Rican stories in his music that appeal to a global audience. And so I was very curious to see how his global audience would react to this very specific Puerto Rican story. And in the comments, people related to it so much. And I got emotional because people are like, dale, Boricua, peleen por lo suyo, defiéndanse. There was so much support for us, from his fans around the world. And so many people from their part of the world also related to the feeling of feeling pushed out of your neighborhood. There were a lot of comments from people in Mexico because after the pandemic, there's been a lot of gentrification from people from the US moving to Mexico to be digital nomads and whatever. So I felt like it resonated, in ways that I found really beautiful. What was your experience of, this platform, a different audience from your usual audience, and what impact has it had on your career and on your work?
I love that because I started getting calls. Usually the calls are from like US media organizations, and all of a sudden I was getting calls from Chile, Ecuador, and they were wanting to do these interviews and talk about this again because they see these stories also play out in their countries. And for me, I always say that in Puerto Rico, there's a lot of insularismo, especialmente en cuanto a los países latinoamericanos. And I just wish we had those stronger bonds because at the end of the day, those are our Latin American siblings. And part of what I've been wanting to do moving forward is do more stories where we stop looking just towards the US and start looking more, open our eyes towards the rest of the world. So, as I was telling you before, I love conversations like this, but the sort of like being interviewed for, TV or for newspapers is not my favorite because I like to be the one asking the questions. But when these opportunities came up, I said yes because I wanted to develop those relationships. So it's been beautiful to sort of have that sort of communication and see the articles they were writing about it, the videos that they were putting together, sort of giving us their input from their perspective. So I really love that. When it comes to the impact it has on my career, I will say that I feel like it hasn't changed a ton in the sense that it was already sort of happening. I was already being asked to, go to events and talk about my work, and it was getting recognized. But there is that added element now of, I guess, that like proximity to like celebrity, which is weird, super weird to me. But in that sense, it has sort of like opened it to a wider audience. But at the end of the day, I'm just always thinking about what's the next story and how can I get out there with my camera and sit down at home. And that's my sweet spot, just like at home with my headphones in my little zone.
The video, the Bad Bunny video, El Apagón, Aquí Vive Gente, people don't refer to it as un reportaje. They refer to it as el documental de Bad Bunny. Do you consider it a documentary? Do you consider yourself a documentarian? Is that something you want to explore more?
It's funny. It's just like journalist for the longest time. I felt like el título me quedaba grande. That's sort of how I feel with documentalista, It's sort of like a little intimidating because I have such like high view of what a documentary is, So yes, I refer to it as a documentary because that was sort of the conversation from the beginning. At the same time that I'm sure that like hardcore documentary filmmakers will be like, well, that's not really a documentary, So I would love to, my dream is to eventually get into like a real sort of in-depth, longer documentary, the sort of thing that you would watch on Netflix sort of thing. But yes, I guess there are different ways of doing documentaries, and some people would call some of the stuff that I've done for YouTube, even for my channel, documentary. I would say they're like documentary style pieces of reporting. So I don't think I can call myself a filmmaker, a documentary filmmaker yet, but I would love to eventually get into that deeper sort of work.
Well, I have more questions, but ¿qué 3 minutos? ¿De yo o de yo? Okay. Okay, una pregunta. You on social media, you use social media to talk about your work, you feature your work. But social media is also a lot about the persona, the person. What did you eat for lunch? Well, a selfie with your friends, whatever. How do you manage that part of it? And how do you manage how much you want to share of your personal self, your family, your struggles, everything else that social media sometimes, it lends a platform for?
I think it has changed over time. I think at the beginning, I felt like everything was a piece of content, and there was always a way to tie it into the bigger issues of Puerto Rico. And I think I've relaxed in that sense. I've become more intentional about what it is that I want to communicate. So I don't share what I have for breakfast, for example. And sometimes I balance like what kind of things because I'm passionate about many things, and there are other things that sort of tie into my personal life that I do want to talk about. But I also recognize I don't have unlimited energy and unlimited time. So I have to really sit down and pick like what things. And also I know that people's attention span is short. So I had to like, what do I really want people's attention right now when it comes to what I can provide them? So when it comes to mental health, for example, I'm very passionate about those topics. And it's also just depends on what like stage of my life I'm in. I'm in a very like self-exploratory sort of stage and understanding my own mental health and the tools that I wish I had earlier, the tools that I want other people to have. And I recognize how much it has helped me to see other people be so open about these things and share tools that, if someone asked me, recently someone asked me about a quote that stuck with me, and I'm currently reading a book, and I just shared a page of that book, and there were people DMing me like, wow, can you actually take a better picture of that, because I'm going through something and I want to read it. And I'm like, of course. And those sort of things, I love connecting with the audience about other things. And it could get really heavy with the kind of things that I cover, so it's nice to connect about something else, something that is not always these heavy topics. So I don't really have a formula for that. I know that I have shared a lot less when it comes to personal stuff, and I used to share a lot more and about everything. Now I'm a little bit more intentional, but it ebbs and flows. It just depends on where my mind is at the time.
We have questions from the audience. Can't imagine a room full of Puerto Ricans who don't have nothing to say. Ain't never seen that in my life. ¿Cómo es esto, Carmen?
Hola, saludo.
Hola.
So I had 2 questions. Am I allowed to ask 2 questions?
Ask them both together, yeah.
Okay, you got it. So you've become a very prominent face when it comes to reporting, and I think that you've done a great job at democratizing what reporting is, because before we used to see like reporters, celebrity, like unattainable, and so I know that there's a lot of people too that slide into your DMs to cover a lot of things, and I wanted to know, how do you handle that pressure? And also, when you cover topics like Act 20, 22, Act 60, there are a lot of very powerful people that don't necessarily have the best intentions. How do you keep yourself safe as a woman and as a reporter in general?
I'm glad you asked both those questions. They were both very good.
So I forgot the first one. Thank you. So, what's funny? Sometimes people think that what can affect you the most is sort of the negative comments. To me, some of those are like comical at this point because of the things they say. To me, it affects me a lot more, sort of the pressure of the expectations. And I've gotten better at it. But at the beginning, there was a time that I was just so grateful that anyone was listening at all, that I was really trying to get back to every single DM and to actually like go after the story that they wanted me to cover. Oh my God. And it was like driving me crazy. And I was at a breaking point that I was like, okay, wait, I need a new strategy because I can't do this. So I've had to get comfortable with disappointing people, as hard as it still is for me. Yes, I get a lot of messages and I get a lot of emails, and even when I meet people, you should cover this, you need to do this, and you need to do this other thing. And I've just had to get really clear about what I'm covering in the moment, and how if I try to cover everything, then I'm not going to do a good job. I had to really focus on the story that I'm doing in the moment to do the best job with that story. So that has been sort of the guiding light. And yeah, and I'm just sort of driven by my curiosity and also the topics that I think are important at the time, and doing a good job there so that then I can move on to the next thing. When it comes to keeping myself safe, I will say that I am very grateful that nothing threatening like that has happened to me. I do know that there are people who love me and others who not so much. So it is in the back of my mind sometimes. You know, I live a very normal life and I'm just out there without any extra protection. So sometimes I do think about it and people ask me about it. I will say that so far nothing like that has happened, but it is something that I had to reconsider, as you know, with every story I do and with any potential danger that can come up. But so far, and again, you know, I don't expect everyone to love the kind of work I do, and I am very open to constructive criticism and whether I miss something or not. I really hope and that's not the kind of thing that happens in Puerto Rico, you know, that my life would be threatened for doing this kind of work. So.
Bianca, we have a question from one of our viewers on Zoom. It's from Jocelyn Bonadio, and she's asking, what's the role of the diaspora in the liberation and anti-colonialism of Puerto Ricans? Simple question.
That's a deep question. No
Cafecito like the centro.
What I can speak to is the role of the diaspora in general when it comes to all the things that happen in Puerto Rico. I would not be doing this work if it weren't for the support of the diaspora. And I have felt that sort of building of community and that desire to connect to these issues and this recognition that people inside and outside of Puerto Rico are both essential to whatever is going to happen moving forward and to improve the quality of life of quality of life of Puerto Ricans in general. So, you know, my role is not to advocate for independence, for example. So I can't speak necessarily to what the diaspora can do to make that happen. My role is, if that is the conversation, that I want to be part of it and talk to the people who are actively participating in that and give that different perspective. I did a series on Puerto Rico status where I went a little deeper into sort of like each political party, what they represent, and I learned so much. I was embarrassed to find out that I didn't know the difference between Estado Libre Asociado y Libre Asociación. At my 30-something years, I didn't know this. And I'm thinking, how many other Puerto Ricans have no idea? And these are conversations that happen in Puerto Rico every single day about Puerto Rico status. And we don't know the difference of the options available to us. So in those conversations, in that series, it was important for me to talk to people in the diaspora, and it's just an integral part of what I do.
Buenas noches.
Hola.
So 2 quick questions, if I may. With regards to Acts 20, 22, and 60, can we expect a follow-up story, especially leading into the upcoming elections in Puerto Rico, and how these beneficiaries have voting rights? Will you be covering that process or that information? And secondly, here in the diaspora, we often question what's going on after these politicians are arrested. We saw the coverage on Wanda, we you know, and alike, but we don't see any follow-up, any follow-through. Is that an area of interest for you? Thank you.
I will say that neither are stories that are necessarily on my list right now. When it comes to Act 22 and Act 60, I could be wrong, but what I have seen is not necessarily that direct involvement in activism when it comes. I don't see a real interest in mobilizing big groups. You know, we're talking about some 3,000 people that right now have the degree. So I don't necessarily see that sort of mobilizing as a voting bloc to influence in that way. What we do see and that we saw in that documentary was the influence that they have in terms of donations to political figures. So they are a force like that. And I think it's an interesting aspect when it comes to the conversation about Puerto Rico's political status, because we know that this act exists because of Puerto Rico's current status. If it were a state, this wouldn't be happening. If we were independent, there's a possibility, but it would be a lot harder. These people it couldn't be so easy to just keep your US citizenship and go to Puerto Rico. What's so attractive about it is that it's a US territory. So it's like moving to another state sort of thing. So again, as a reporter, as these questions come up, if I find something interesting and I see that aspect, those elements that I always look for in stories of like how it's affecting communities and seeing how things are happening from the grassroots, then yes, it would be something that I would jump on. The other question was about politicians. I try to focus more on sort of the links between what's happening in Puerto Rico with the US relationship. So I will say that I don't cover much of, the corruption cases with local politicians. And it's funny because I get a lot of comments about that. I talk about something, being critical about the colonial relationship and how it affects people and the responsibility of the US government. And people are like, why don't you talk about how corrupt your politicians are? And I'm like, there's a lot of other people talking about that, like it's in the front page of a Nuevo this and that. I agree with you that sometimes, there's so many things to cover that it's hard to do the follow-up. And a lot of times these cases sort of like fade. Yeah, they fade into the background. It's not what I focus on, but when there is that sort of like interesting connection there, something that I know is the sort of content that my audience is interested in, and there's that connection of like colonialism and how it ties into the federal government, then yes, it's something I pay attention to.
I have to plug, there's a podcast called En Que Quedó that is really good about like, oh, that thing that fell off our radar. What happened with that? So.
Bianca, it's great to see you here, and thank you to El Centro for hosting this. My question is about your own professional development and how you continue to refine your own expertise, build your own skills as a journalist as you're continuing to do this work. And in particular, I'm wondering if you have a strong peer network of young women who maybe want to follow in your footsteps or learn from you, or that you can learn from. I'm curious how you see the journalistic landscape in Puerto Rico, maybe in the diaspora, and who you're following and inspired by as you continue to think about your own growth and professional career.
Yeah, I'm always consuming content. You would think that if I'm relaxing and at my house and I turn on Netflix, but it's really like taking notes, like, oh wow, I really like those graphics and I like the way that they formed this story to tell this. So I'm always thinking that way and always like grabbing ideas from, places that are different. And that was part of what sort of speared that sort of going independent, because seeing how we did traditional news, I knew that there was this need for it to be changed somehow, for it to be fresh. So I've looked for inspiration and ideas like outside of journalism, how other people are doing content that is appealing to a different audience, and how to tie that into journalism. When it comes to connecting, I would love to do a lot more collaborations. Like I said, it was amazing to be able to have a team when we did that documentary. So the dream is to be able to consistently work with a team of people. And part of that is Camila is here with me and she's from 9 Millones. That's the network that I'm working with right now that has allowed me to sort of, get outside of my house and like collaborate with other people instead of just it all being me by myself. So it's been amazing to do that, to connect with other people and start creating that network. And Camille, my business partner, she's very passionate about that education aspect. So she's the one sort of like creating the infrastructure to make that happen. So there are a lot of ideas in the work, and I have been going to some universities because I do wonder that, I think about myself 10 years ago when I was in the university, and the path was you'll graduate from here, you'll be a local reporter, and you'll hope to make it to the network. But now that fewer and fewer people are watching traditional news, I wonder what the path looks like. And, I always feel a little guilty because people might see what I'm doing and be like, oh, I'd rather do that. But I don't have all the answers. It's not that easy. And we didn't even get to it. But when it comes to how to fund this and how to make it sustainable, we're still trying to figure out how to do that, because you could get millions of views on social media, and that doesn't mean money in order to be able to sustain it. So I'm able to have the support of people that allow me to cover my basic expenses. But when I want to hire a team, I've been very transparent about it on social media. It's very expensive to sort of create these like productions. It's not just doing the journalism part, but now you want to have audio visual content. There's so many little parts that go into it, I don't have that Bad Bunny money for every single story I do. So that's sort of like what we're trying to figure out as we go.
Hi, my name is Catherine. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I find it so fascinating from your perspective of a popular journalist. That's kind of the way that society is moving now. Kids, everyone pays attention to these very short audio clips or videos of news. And that's kind of the way that, sharing information is going. And it's kind of fascinating to hear all of your thought processes behind it, how you market yourself, your face, and all of that about the image that you were talking about. So I'm just very curious, I suppose, from a researcher perspective, when you do your stories, what informs your research process? Because you mentioned receiving tips from people on Instagram or other people that but you're in a very influential position of communicating information to the diaspora, the island. What goes into this process, and how do you know when you should stop?
How I should stop with a particular story, or
when is it enough? You can go on and on about
You're
the
right.
story. Yeah.
You're right. And that's a very hard decision with every story. And it always comes down to how much time we have to put this story out, and when you just have to pull the plug and put something out there, because you can edit a story to death and it will never be ready. And that has been a hard process for me. In fact, I remember when I started my YouTube channel, when I quit my job, it was about mid 2020, and I did like a few more videos. By January 2021, I had gotten into a flow of creating certain videos, and I had this one particular video that was driving me crazy because I think I was still stuck in that perfectionism loop. And I think that's why this is important for me to talk about mental health, because it has been such a main part about what has allowed me to be able to do this work, working on myself, my thought process. So attaching myself to that perfectionism that doesn't exist, the idea of this perfect story was driving me crazy. And I remember there being some days that I had just like battled with myself in front of my computer, trying to write this script and failing, and just like ending up exhausted because I wasn't being gentle with myself. I was just like beating myself up. Like, you call yourself a journalist? Like, what's going on? I guess you can't do this. So that whole negative self-talk was driving me crazy. And I would just end the day like crying in my bed, being like, what have I done? Can I actually do this or not? So it has been a long process of working on my mental health. I got a coach who has been very important for me to be able to work on these things so that I can say, it's better done than perfect. And I can only do my very best. So just putting one foot in front of the other, and it still works on me where I'm like, okay, that story, well, that could have been better and that could have been better. But it's just a process of working through those things and being like, I am doing the best I can, and every story is just going to get better. So just do this one so you can get to the next one. So it has been that, and again, being very strict with the fact checking, because at the end of the day, my job is not to ignore information that would change the course of the story, but doing the best story I can with the information I have at the time and giving myself a deadline. Like, this is the time the story is coming out, and what you have and with the best you've done is what you're putting out there.
It's wonderful. I had a mentor who told me you have to choose between being perfect and being prolific. And I was like, I think I'd rather be prolific, especially since perfectionism is impossible anyway. But I do think this has been a perfect cafecito. I want to thank everyone who came out on a rainy Wednesday. I know they came for your star power. Que Bad Bunny ni Bad Bunny, olvídate de eso. And I want to thank, this is our last event of the year, so I want to thank my staff who worked so hard, our Centro staff, and we have a nice little reception so that I know you guys want to keep talking. Especially want to thank you, Bianca, for joining us. This has really been very special and a dream come true for me. So exciting to meet you and be in dialogue with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, and thank all of you.